We've all seen the movies. The shadowy figures whispering in smoke-filled rooms, the sinister posters promising a utopia that never arrives. Propaganda, right? Easy to spot, easy to dismiss. Except it's not. Not anymore. Today, propaganda is more sophisticated, more pervasive, and arguably more insidious than ever before. It's not just about dictators with funny moustaches. It's about the subtle messages we encounter every day, shaping our beliefs and influencing our choices without us even realizing it. Think about it. Advertisements tell us what to buy, politicians tell us what to think, and corporations, well, they've got a whole other level of influence going on. We're swimming in a sea of persuasion, folks, and most of us don't even know how to swim. That's where Alex Carey comes in. He's like the lifeguard of critical thinking. His book, Taking the Risk Out of Democracy, is our guide to navigating this treacherous ocean of propaganda. It's time to grab your floaties and dive in. Alex Carey wasn't some tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist. He was an academic, a psychologist, and a damn fine writer. He spent years studying how propaganda works, not just in totalitarian regimes, but in supposedly democratic societies like the United States and Australia. And what did he find? Well, let's just say he wasn't invited to many corporate cocktail parties. Carey argued that propaganda is essential to maintaining corporate power in a democracy. Think about it. Corporations need us to buy their products, support their policies, and generally not rock the boat too much. But here's the catch. They can't just force us to do it, so they rely on more subtle tactics. They use advertising, public relations, and good old-fashioned lobbying to shape our perceptions and influence our behavior. In essence, they're pulling the strings, and we're dancing to their tune. Now, some folks might say, hey, that's just capitalism. Free market and all that, and sure, there's some truth to that. But Carey's point is that this kind of unchecked propaganda undermines the very foundations of democracy. When powerful interests can manipulate public opinion so effectively, it's no longer the people who hold the power, it's the puppet masters. Let's be clear, corporations have always had their fingers in the political pie. But in the 20th century, their influence went into overdrive. The rise of mass media, particularly radio and television, gave them unprecedented access to our eyeballs and eardrums. Suddenly, companies weren't just selling us soap and cigarettes, they were selling us ideas. Ideas about the free market, the American dream, and the inherent awesomeness of their products, and they were really, really good at it. They hired the best ad agencies, the slickest PR firms, and the most persuasive spokespeople money could buy. They poured millions into shaping public opinion, often behind the scenes, through front groups and industry associations. It's like that old saying, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Except in this case, we're not just the product, we're the unwitting participants in our own manipulation. Now, America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, might seem like an odd place to find rampant propaganda. But according to Carey, the US is actually a textbook case of how corporations use public relations to advance their interests. Take the Cold War, for example. It wasn't just a battle of ideologies, it was a battle of narratives. The US government and corporations worked hand in glove to promote the virtues of capitalism and demonize the evils of communism. They funded pro-American propaganda overseas, supported right-wing dictators, and even used Hollywood to spread their message. Remember all those movies about heroic Americans defeating evil commies? Yeah, that wasn't an accident. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated campaign to win hearts and minds, and it worked. The US emerged from the Cold War victorious, but at what cost? Had they sacrificed some of their democratic ideals in the process? Section 5. Down Under, Not So Downplayed, Australia's Dance with Spin. Now, Australia might not be the global superpower that the US is, but don't let that fool you. They've had their fair share of corporate shenanigans and propaganda campaigns. Carey argues that Australia's history is one of corporate power triumphing over public interest time and time again. From the early days of mining and resource extraction to the privatization of public assets, corporations have consistently wielded significant influence over the Australian politics. One particularly egregious example is the campaign by the mining industry to undermine action on climate change. For years, they've funded think tanks, lobbied politicians, and run misleading advertising campaigns to cast doubt on the science of climate change and delay action on this critical issue. And guess what? It's worked. Australia has consistently lagged behind other developed nations in taking action on climate change, much to the detriment of its environment and its future. Section 6. The War of Ideas, Shaping Public Opinion like Playdough. So, how exactly does propaganda work? How do corporations and governments manage to sway public opinion so effectively? Well, it's not magic, folks. It's all about understanding the psychology of persuasion. One common tactic is to appeal to our emotions rather than our logic. Advertisements for sugary drinks don't talk about the health risks. They show us images of happy, attractive people having a great time. Politicians don't always run on their records. They appeal to our fears and prejudices. Another effective technique is repetition. If you hear a message enough times from enough different sources, you're more likely to start believing it, even if there's little evidence to support it. This is how myths and stereotypes take hold. And of course, there's always the tried and true method of fear-mongering. Want to sell more guns? Convince people that crime is out of control. Want to pass more restrictive laws? Scare the public about the threat of terrorism. It's a cynical tactic, but it's incredibly effective. Section 7, Democracy Under Siege. Can we see through the smoke and mirrors? So what's the big deal? Is a little propaganda really going to bring down democracy? Well, Carey certainly thought so. He argued that constant exposure to corporate propaganda makes us more cynical, more apathetic, and less engaged in the democratic process. When we're bombarded with messages telling us what to think, it's easy to become disillusioned with the whole system. We start to believe that our voices don't matter, that the fix is in, and that powerful interests will always get their way. And that's exactly what the puppet masters want. They want us to be passive consumers, not active citizens. They want us to accept the status quo, not challenge it. Because as long as we're distracted and disengaged, they can continue to pull the strings from behind the scenes. Section 8. From Madison Avenue to Your Mind, Propaganda's Enduring Legacy. Here's the thing about propaganda. It doesn't just disappear when the Cold War ends or the ad campaign is over. Its effects linger long after the initial message has faded from memory. The narratives that were spun in the 20th century about the free market, the American dream, and the role of corporations in society continue to shape our world today. They influence our political discourse, our economic policies, and even our personal beliefs. And with the rise of the internet and social media, propaganda has found fertile new ground to flourish. Algorithms curate our news feeds, echo chambers reinforce our existing biases, and misinformation spreads like wildfire. It's easier than ever to get caught in a bubble of our own making, surrounded by information that confirms what we already believe. Section 9, Fighting Back, Reclaiming Our Minds, One Truth at a Time. So, is it all hopeless? Are we doomed to be pawns in the corporate propaganda machine forever? Not necessarily, but it's going to take a conscious effort to reclaim our minds and our democracy. We need to be more critical of the information we consume, more aware of the forces trying to shape our opinions, and more willing to challenge the status quo. We need to support independent journalism, demand transparency from our elected officials, and hold corporations accountable for their actions. Most importantly, we need to start talking to each other again. Not just with people who agree with us, but with people who hold different views, different perspectives, and different experiences. Because the only way to counter the divisive effects of propaganda is to build bridges of understanding and empathy. It's not going to be easy. The puppet masters are powerful, and they're not going to give up their control easily. But as Margaret Mead once said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.